Hello, Connecticut, and welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. The title basically says it all. I'm Nancy Barrow, and I will be delving into this new state program and how it can help you and your family. This podcast will give you information you should know about Connecticut paid leave and maybe just a little bit more. Connecticut paid leave brings peace of mind to your home, family, and workplace. Welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. Today, I'm speaking with the new CEO and leader of Connecticut Paid Leave, Erin Choquette. Before becoming the CEO, she was the Chief Operating Officer and General Counsel of the Paid Leave Authority. And before that, Erin worked at the Department of Administrative Services, and she served as the Policy and Legislative Advisor to the DAS Commissioner, and also did a lot of legal functions there. And at DAS, she co-authored the Family and Medical Leave Entitlements Manual, an extensive and detailed guide to understanding and administering federal and state family and medical leave laws. And Federal FMLA turned 30 on February 5th of this year, which is a big date. And we'll get to all that later. Connecticut FMLA, Federal FMLA, Connecticut paid leave. It's all very confusing. So Erin will set us all straight. Thanks for being on the podcast, Erin.
Well, thank you for having me, Nancy.
Being the new CEO, how are you adjusting, or is it kind of routine for you?
It's not routine. There's a lot more administrative work, a lot more oversight than I had been doing before. Mm-hmm. I helped build the agency, so it's not like anything is new. It's just responsibilities I didn't have before.
I would imagine that you didn't expect to be CEO. Was that something that you expected to happen eventually, or were you thinking you were going to throw your hat in the ring?
I was in a lot of denial. I knew that Andrea has so much to offer to the state and to the world, and so that she wasn't going to stay with the authority forever.
Right.
I just didn't think about it. I love the authority, and I love being part of this program, which brings so much help to so many people. So I always anticipated there'd be a continued role for me.
Well, let's talk about your public service and your journey. What was it that originally drew you away from law, because you practice law? What was it that drew you away from that and to the state?
It was actually my love for being a lawyer. I was in private practice for 9 years. And I really liked the law parts of that. Mm-hmm. I loved advising clients. I loved analyzing situations and developing the arguments. What I didn't love was the business, the recruiting of clients and the billable hours and all of those pieces that are truly necessary in a private practice because you have to bring in clients. I'm not good at that. So I was given the opportunity to be a lawyer for DAS, and here's my built-in client.
Well, I mean, you sell Connecticut paid leave in a different way. It's more promoting. You're not selling.
Right.
You're not selling any goods.
I'm not asking for money.
Is it too early for you to have a vision? Because it came very quickly and it happened very, very fast. Do you have a vision yet for what you want to have happen?
So I've been saying that this year is our real change from startup to steady state. We have been flying the airplane while building it for 3 years now. And so it's built, and we have an opportunity to, land safely and now just improve. What did we do in the past 2.5, 3 years? Why did we do it that way? Are there procedures we can improve? Are there policy decisions that we made because they seemed like the right idea, but now we've tested them and we can tweak them? We built it. We landed it. We've got to fly again. Let's make it better.
So how do you do that? How do you tweak policy? It's a state entity. How does it work?
So great question. Because we're a quasi-public agency, we don't have traditional regulations the way a regular agency would. We have policies that have the legal effect of regulations. And both regulations and our policies are meant to fill in the details of the law. So the law is sort of like that topic sentence, and then you've got to fill in the rest of the paragraph. For us, our policies are developed, then we present them to the relevant board committee for their feedback. Then we bring it to the full board. Then we post them for public comment. We post them in the Connecticut Law Journal. We have 30 days for folks to review them, get back to us, and give us their edits. And then we maybe make changes, maybe not, but we present those comments back to the board, explain our reasoning, and then they vote again. For some of our more substantive policies and some like the bigger initiatives, even before we do that full public comment process, we will share the proposals with stakeholders. We'll talk to other agencies. We'll talk to people we know are willing to work with us and get their thoughts on it so that we have something pretty well baked before we bring it out. And sometimes we go back at it. We'll make revisions and we'll start the process over again.
So are there any glaring policy changes that?
We have a policy that will be posted in next week's Connecticut Law Journal that relates to our private plan audits. As an alternate form of compliance, if an employer wants to either buy an insurance policy or create their own self-funded plan based on our policy documents, they're allowed to do that as long as it is as good or better with our program. So we have a number of approved private plans. We have the authority to audit those private plans to make sure that they're doing everything they said they do and that the employees are getting the benefit. So we created an audit, really it's like a guide or a manual. And with this one, we did work a long time with employers, insurance companies, and other stakeholders. We actually did a full beta test and actually did a sample audit with a volunteer so we could assess what we were missing. What timeframes do we need? Oh, yeah, we forgot to build in that time to meet and discuss. That took a long time, but we have a much better product. We brought it to the board last week. And so that's the big one that we have out right now.
That's great. I mean, and I'm sure there'll probably be more that come along
Absolutely.
as you go. How did you get into co-authoring the FMLA manual? How did you even start that? Like, I would have such writer's block. I'm like, okay, so how do you even start this?
I co-wrote that with a friend and colleague whose name is Diane Mazur-Roberts. She worked in the statewide HR at DAS. She is still with us, but is retired from state service. And she was really the primary expert for agencies on administering federal FMLA, state FMLA, and the state of Connecticut policies for state employees. And ever since I started working at DAS, I did training with her on FMLA. When she told me that she was going to retire, I was like, oh, we can't replicate her knowledge. And I had more and more responsibilities. And I'm like, I certainly am not going to fill that gap. I can't spend all day on the phone with agencies. So we thought, all right, let's create a really detailed training manual. And then as we started writing it, we're like, this is not a training manual. This is a book. It almost took 2 years because halfway through, like if we were just finished with the first year of writing, we were about 2/3 of the way through with our planned out chapters, and the law changed and state policies changed. So we had to go back. So it took a little longer, but we published it and copyrighted it in the fall of 2017. And so it was really meant for state of Connecticut agency HR professionals and state of Connecticut employees because it talks a lot about our state of Connecticut policies. And then I rewrote it again last year with to make sure that the Connecticut FMLA changes were accounted for.
Yeah, because it changed.
Yeah.
And I think, well, I wanted to find out a little bit more about you as our CEO, and I really needed your expertise on all things FMLA. And since you wrote the manual, who better to talk to than an author? I think most people listening to this podcast won't know anything about federal FMLA, Connecticut state FMLA, and they think Connecticut paid leave is all part of the same thing. I want to set the record straight. What are the differences now between federal FMLA and Connecticut state FMLA?
Federal FMLA and Connecticut FMLA provide job-protected leave for eligible employees for covered reasons. Differences is that federal FMLA covers different employers. They have different eligibility standards for the person and their definition of family, and therefore who can take caregiver leave is different. It used to be that federal FMLA covered more employers than Connecticut, but that radically changed last year with the new Connecticut FMLA. So right now, federal FMLA applies to employers with 50 or more employees within a 75-mile radius and any governmental entity of any size. So municipalities, schools, states, they're all covered under federal FMLA. Connecticut FMLA, on the other hand, now covers employers with employees working in Connecticut if they have one or more employees working in Connecticut. But it excludes governmental entities.
Yeah.
So towns, school boards, as well as private schools are excluded from Connecticut FMLA. For towns and public schools, they can collectively bargain in. There's no mechanism for private schools to come into the Connecticut program under Connecticut FMLA or Connecticut paid leave. Actually, and I want to be clear, towns and schools can bargain into coverage under Connecticut paid leave. They cannot bargain into coverage under Connecticut FMLA.
Really?
They could adopt policies that mimic Connecticut FMLA, but the DOL would not enforce those policies.
Why don't they have it standard across the board that they do mirror each other? I know they mirror each other in many ways.
Federal FMLA was passed first. Connecticut FMLA was passed in like 96 or 97. They wanted to show that they had a state entitlement. It used to be that it was 16 weeks in a 2-year period, so it was a slightly different entitlement. But Connecticut law used to be 75 or more employees. So they really exempted all of those small employers.
Right.
So when they passed it, they had never included the towns. They had never included the schools. They were just, it was sort of an add-on for larger employers.
For larger employers. Do you think that they'll ever change that policy?
Funny you should ask that. There are no fewer than 8 bills that were proposed between yesterday and today that relate to the definition of covered employer under CT paid leave. None of them yet talk about CT FMLA. Some want to expand our reach. Some want to reduce it. But it's so there's a lot of discussion.
Yeah.
I don't know what the legislature will do.
When you are taking, like, say you're scheduled for a surgery and you're taking your Connecticut FMLA, is it redundant to have the federal? Like, what does the federal do that Connecticut wouldn't do? It's all job protection.
Right. The thing to remember about both federal and Connecticut FMLA is that it is a statutory entitlement to make sure that employees have that time, but it is also meant to at least account for some of the employer's interests. The idea being that, look, if as an employer, your employee is sick, they can't work anyway.
Right.
But we know that you have a business to run, so that's why it's limited to 12 weeks. It's not unlimited. And both laws say that it is the employer's right and responsibility to designate time that is covered under the law as being that law. So that the employer can say, okay, you're covered under both laws. You have a reason that's covered under both laws. We're going to count down both. That's part of that balancing of interest between the employee and the employer. You can't just say, oh, I'll use one and not the other.
Yeah, it's a law that you have to.
Right.
Okay. And let's do 2 separate scenarios if we can. A worker is having a scheduled surgery that will keep him out of work for 3 months. How early do they apply for Connecticut FMLA, Connecticut paid leave? And does, if they're eligible, the federal FMLA?
The rule is you apply 30 days in advance or as soon as reasonable. So if you know that you're going to have surgery on, February 15th, you should go to your HR or your operations manager or whoever, at least by January 15th to say, I'm going to be out. My surgery is scheduled for this day. My doctor's not sure how long I'll be out. It might be 6 to 8 weeks. That gives you and the employer enough time to make sure that they can review your eligibility, approve your leave, get your documents in, and for the employer to plan for how to cover for your absence. So your doctor may not give you your forms right away. If it's your own serious health condition, you need a medical certification. It can often take a couple weeks to get that. So, that 30 days is really meant to give everybody enough time to get everything in and decided and kind of planned for. When we were building the Connecticut paid leave program, we said, we think that 30 days in advance for foreseeable absences makes sense for us too. One, we want to be consistent with FMLA to make it easier.
Yeah, right.
If you're getting a med cert from your doctor, get one med cert, give it to your employer and to us in the same time frame. We didn't want to lead people astray and say, oh, you have, just tell us 2 weeks in advance because you're thinking 2 weeks is right. And now your employer is mad at you because you didn't do it 30 days in advance. And even though we don't have to worry about coverage while you're out, we still want to make sure that you've got your money squared away. If there's any issues, it's all good.
Right.
So we follow that approach. If you don't know you're going to be out, though, you're supposed to tell us.
You have a car accident.
Right. You tell us as soon as reasonable. So that doesn't mean that you are calling from the ambulance, but you're going to call your significant other first, right? And then your boss, and then when you figure stuff out, you call us. But you also have to call your boss as soon as reasonable. Mm-hmm. So again, we want to follow that FMLA so that we can encourage people to get that job protection. Call your boss and say, I can't believe it. I got injured on the way home. My doctor's saying I'm going to be out for 6 weeks. I don't even know. The FMLA process starts then. The CT paid leave process starts then. We know that if you are sick or you're in the hospital or whatever, it may be hard for you to apply. So we do make it possible for you to authorize a third party, a friend, a parent, a spouse, to do all this on your behalf. Mm-hmm. We're very open to that so that someone else can help you through that process. There's a form, so we know that you've authorized them to do it.
Right.
It's a simple form, doesn't need to be notarized. But we still, what's going on with you? How long do you think you'll be out? Still need that med cert. Still the same thing you're going to give to your employer. So just make a copy, give us one, give your employer the other. And so we work with you on that. At the end of the day, we want you to tell us that you need benefits within 45 days of the start of your leave. So we're not saying it has to be done in the first few days, but the sooner you let us know, the sooner we can start the process and get you those benefits.
And get you the benefits, especially the paid portion of it.
It's a real need. It's something that for years people were saying, I can't afford to take the time off. I can't afford to get the knee surgery that I desperately need. Or I can't afford to, be with my baby who's in the NICU. The fact that we can provide some measure of economic relief really helps our families, helps our communities, and it helps the workforce, right? You're a much better worker if you can focus and you're not constantly worrying about what's going on at the hospital.
And I do think it makes Connecticut a more attractive state to move to.
And, all of our neighbors already have it.
Yeah.
So, if you have a choice to live in Massachusetts or Rhode Island or Connecticut, and it's like, oh, well, if I work in Rhode Island, I have access to this benefit. Working in Connecticut was at a disadvantage by not having it.
One of the interesting things that you mentioned, if someone is out on leave with FMLA, you are not allowed to work from home. And with the hybrid situation that we have now, most people are working from home. What happens if people are working? Will the benefits go away? Are they in violation?
Let's talk about FMLA first and paid leave second.
Okay.
It's all driven by what your healthcare provider says. If they say you should not work at all, your employer is going to say, don't work at all. And we're going to say, listen to your doctor. If you can work some, you can still take leave. It's called reduced schedule leave or maybe intermittent leave. Reduced schedule is I can work some, but I can't work a full schedule. I can work 3 hours a day or I can work 2 days a week. That's covered under FMLA. The time that you're not working is the job protected time, but then you go back to work for the rest. And we will provide income replacement benefits for that time that you're not working.
Right, whether it's intermittent or reduced schedule.
Right. Intermittent is more sporadic. It's like I have a condition, it flares up, and when it flares up, I'm down for the count. Or I have periodic doctor's appointments. They're not every Tuesday, but I've got 3 this week and then I've got 1 next week. But I'll be able to work. So we want people to be able to work if they can.
Right.
But the goal is to make sure that if you are caring for a loved one who's sick, you should be able to be there. If you are bonding with a newborn or a newly adopted child, the purpose of being home is to focus your attention on that child. It's not to be holding the baby with one hand and fielding calls with the other. So part of the reason we say don't work is because we want employees to get the benefit of the time away. I think we've all had the experience where you're supposedly on vacation and then you end up fielding calls all day. That wasn't a vacation day.
That's not a vacation.
Right? Like, that's not leave. So that's
Right.
the idea.
Yeah. Interesting. So on February 5th, FMLA turned 30 years old, and it was established in, I think, 1993, if I did my math right. It protects people when they take time away from work unpaid, and they're supposed to get their job back or a job as similar to theirs as possible. What happens when someone has been on leave, they're sick, or they had a baby, and they come back, their job has been filled, but they get paid the same, but it's different hours, and they're unhappy with that? Is there any action that an employee can take at that point saying, oh, this was supposed to be job protection?
Job protection means you get your job back, right? Like, it doesn't mean, we'll find a place for you in the corner. And it depends on the length of leave, right? Like, I'm out for 2 weeks. Okay. I'm out for 12 weeks. The work has to get done. My case files got handed to somebody else. So when I come back, I have new cases. That's your job, right? But what the employer can't do is change your shift or change your location. I can't. When I do training, there used to be these ads for like, Bob from Accountants is great. It's like, you can't be like, oh, Bob from Accountants was so great. I don't need you anymore. No. So there's a certain level of recognition of sort of reasonability here. Mm-hmm. But if you come back and the employer's like, no, we like Bob better, or we'll send you down to the other half of the state or whatever, that is interference of your FMLA entitlement. And so if you believe that has happened, and you believe it has happened because you took FMLA, right? Like, if it's a seasonal job, the pool closes in September and you come back in October.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Reasonably.
Right. Like, if there are other reasons for the change, that's a separate issue. But if it's connected to your FMLA leave, you can file a complaint. If you are taking federal FMLA, you can file a complaint with the federal DOL, Department of Labor. If it's a Connecticut FMLA, you can file a complaint with the Connecticut Department of Labor. Or you could go straight to court and file a lawsuit. So both laws have both avenues, the administrative approach and the lawsuit.
So what happens when you have a chronic health condition? Can you get, in the 12 months, can you go every year if you have a chronic issue, like if you have ulcerative colitis or something and you get flare-ups, but you're taking 12 weeks off? Because sometimes the flare-ups are bad. I've had friends who have that, or any other kind of chronic issue. Can you take it every year for a chronic issue?
So again, let's talk about FMLA first, and then we can talk about paid leave. So for both federal and Connecticut FMLA, the entitlement is 12 weeks of leave in a 12-month period. The employer has the right to decide how to define the 12-month period. There are 4 possible ways. Calendar, anniversary that doesn't have to be January 1st. It can be like hire date. The look forward, which is individual to each person who takes leave. If I take leave on January 20th, 2023, my 12-month period ends on January 19th, 2024.
Right.
Or look back, which is if I take leave on January 20th, 2023 for one day, then on January 20th, 2024, I get that day back. It's easier to do than to explain, but like each day you use, you earn back on its anniversary.
Yep.
So employers can pick of those 4. If you use up your 12 weeks before your 12-month period is over, then you don't have any job-protected leave under FMLA anymore. Mm-hmm. Lots of folks with chronic conditions don't ever actually use their full 12 weeks. They might use 12 days. Yeah. They might use whatever. When that 12-month period ends, however it's defined, they would apply again.
Next year.
And the employer would say, okay, are you still eligible? Is your condition the same? Has it changed in any way? So you do that new application. So that's kind of how it works on the FMLA side. On paid leave side, it works very similarly. We have opted for the look back method. So you earn a day every day. If a person has a chronic condition and applied to us for benefits, in January of last year, and they still have that chronic condition, they would have reported to us each time they were out over the past year. They would file a new application. We would rerun their eligibility, and start a new 12-month period starting as of that new application date.
Okay.
It's something that it's important to remember. It doesn't just last forever. Mm-hmm. We need to see if the medical circumstances have changed.
Right.
What you often see is maybe there's a new treatment, and so your flare-ups are much less frequent. Really, we're talking mostly about intermittent leave. You can use that for caregiver situations too.
Right.
And maybe things have changed in your family, so now you've got more people available to do the caregiving. It's not all on you. You're going to use less this year. Or maybe you need to use more, But either way, every year you would file that new application.
And I know that COVID in itself is not a reason for leave for Connecticut paid leave, but long haul COVID is something very different. And I think that we probably all know someone who has had some issues with it. Is that also covered with FMLA and with Connecticut paid leave?
So again, we use the same definition between Connecticut paid leave and FMLA. And federal and state use the same definition. We all use the same definition of serious health condition, which is this multi-part definition.
It is. It's pretty extensive.
But it really comes down to being incapacitated, meaning you are unable to work, or if you're a kid, go to school or engage in sort of your regular activities for a period of time. And you are under the care and treatment of a healthcare provider. So the reason that sort of just getting infected with COVID, it may not be a serious health condition, is that your healthcare provider may say, there's no treatment for you other than rest and chicken soup and,
right.
take some over-the-counter medicine. This isn't new to COVID. This has always been the regulation. It's been the same for the flu. It's been the same for asthma, anything where you have a continuum of how much it affects you. So we always look to say, okay, we're not necessarily concerned with the diagnosis. We're concerned with, are you getting treatment from the healthcare provider? Is the healthcare provider putting on some sort of regimen of prescription drugs? Are you seeing, for a chronic condition, which really long-haul COVID is turned into a chronic condition?
Yeah.
Are you seeing your healthcare provider for treatment, and are they following up with you at least twice a year? There's one exception to the treatment rule, and that is in certain long-term, usually end-of-life situations where there has been a decision made that there's no longer an attempt to cure, right? We recognize that there is not a cure possible. We're now in the situation of palliative care. You're still under the oversight of a physician or other healthcare provider. You're not actively looking for a cure. So we're not asking for that, but we are still looking for documentation that says, yes, this person has renal failure. We've transitioned into hospice,
right?
Where or this person has dementia. The prescription drugs are not working. We've made the decision to take the person off of the prescription drugs. They are still being reviewed and taken care of. So that's kind of not exactly treatment per se, but it's still that medical intervention.
Care, yeah. You recently did a review since we started giving benefits out at this time last year. What are you most proud of that we accomplished last year?
Oh, great question. The law passed and was signed in the summer of 2019. That first year, I was still at DAS, but part of my job was to help get the authority up and running before we even called it the authority. We had to identify the board members and have the first board meetings. And Andrea started, I think, on March 3rd or 4th, and 2 weeks later, we were all sent home with COVID. So we built a full agency, and we did it on time, and we did it under the expected budget. That was extraordinary. And even though we had a rocky rollout, last spring, we kind of cleared our backlog. We started getting a much more consistent approach to turning the claims around and getting things done promptly. We've been able to help over 45,000 Connecticut workers who had major life experiences and needed that financial assistance to be able to make sure they could put food on their plates and pay their rent and pay for the medications. There were a lot of people that we were able to help, and I'm really thrilled that we were able to do that. And now we just need to keep going. Go bigger, go better. There's a lot of improvements that we want to make. We've gotten a lot of feedback, and so we're just taking all of that in and just continuing to improve.
I think when you look at how much we've doled out in benefits, like $250 million, that's pretty impressive that it went right into workers' hands when they needed it.
When they needed it. And it went into the Connecticut economy, right? It's people who could pay for food. It's people who could pay their rent. One of the big arguments for passing paid leave is that it's a way of helping people in that short term when they really need it. So you don't have the cascading effects of people losing their homes, people not being able to afford their bills. I mean, this is meant to help people in situations that really need it and are really benefiting for it. And then the whole community benefits. Nobody benefits when you have evictions. Like, that's not a good thing for anybody.
No, and living paycheck to paycheck is hard, right? And so you need these benefits. And I think now we've all met people who've utilized the program and have benefited and loved it. And it was easy for them.
Right.
And we are still making improvements.
And trying to make it easier, trying to make it more intuitive, trying to take apart everything and scrutinize it and say, okay, what can be done to make this easier to apply, easier to understand? But we're going to continue to take that feedback and to say, oh, okay, yeah, that could be better. For example, for a variety of reasons, pregnancy and bonding are two separate things. There's two separate sets of documents. But in practice, and you don't have to take them right away. Like you can do your recovery from pregnancy and then go back to work and then bond anytime in the 12 months. But a lot of people take it all at once.
Yeah, they do.
And we got a lot of feedback saying, why are you basically making me apply twice for what I consider to be the same event? I had the baby, I'm with the baby.
Right.
Like, what's going on? We took that feedback and we are revamping that piece of our program so that it will be sort of a simpler, more streamlined
way to apply
and way to maintain with a dedicated troop at AFLAC, our third-party administrator, so they can really develop that expertise. So, that's direct feedback that we received where it was like, okay, whatever you thought was a good idea, and there were reasons for it, it is superseded by the user experience. Mm-hmm. We're like, okay, we need to make the user experience our primary consideration.
Right. Make it friendlier.
Yeah.
Make it easier. I think one of the things when we're talking about bonding leave is I'm so thrilled that men are taking
Absolutely.
that time. It's shocking and it's wonderful. I think this new generation realizes that, hey, I need to bond with my child. And they're really taking the time.
It's really lovely. And, it was just last week that Commissioner Bai, who runs the Office of Early Education, said that they're already seeing an impact on childcare because there's a childcare shortage. And the fact that so many, they're saying that the fact that so many parents, both sets of parents, were taking bonding leave, and you can take it at the same time as your partner, or you can stagger it. It means that somebody's home with that baby. Maybe that baby's not going into daycare at 6 weeks. Maybe that baby's going to go into daycare at 6 months, which, is lovely for the family, but also alleviates a little bit of that stress on daycares because the younger the child is, the higher the proportion is. And so we're seeing that, and therefore there are more spots available to other people who needed to have their children in those daycare settings.
Which is fantastic.
I was so grateful that the commissioner shared that information with us.
Well, I think one of the questions I get asked most frequently is, what is Connecticut FMLA, Connecticut paid leave? Is it the same thing? What's federal FMLA? And I think you answered all of the questions that people might have about them.
I hope so.
And the differences.
If they have more questions, we have a lot of information on our website, ctpaidleave.org. The Connecticut DOL has a lot of information on their website. We're actually in that spirit of continuous improvement. As you know, Nancy, we're in the middle of a major effort to rehaul our website and provide how many exponentially more information. We've got a lot of information we're kind of shoving in there to really help people understand the reasons for leave, right? Like that's the first thing. I want to be a foster parent. I didn't know that I could take leave to bond with that child who's now been placed with me. That's great.
Yep.
Same
thing with adoption.
Adoption, someone experiencing family violence is like, oh, wait, you mean I can take job protected time away from work to relocate? Great. Oh, I can get income replacement benefits while I'm out of work, while I'm relocating. I think the more information we can share and just have available to people so that when they're experiencing those events, either good or bad, they know they can come to us. One of the things I'd like to do on the new website is kind of create a script. This is how you tell your employer you need time off. And these are the things to ask for.
That's a great idea. Because I do think people get intimidated talking to their boss.
Yeah.
You don't need to tell them everything.
No, there's like 5 basic questions, right?
Yep.
Like, this is what I need, what are our policies that apply to me in terms of getting the time off? What documents do you need? Do we have any policies as a company for income replacement? Do I have sick time? Do we have short-term disability? And what else do you need? And then that starts that conversation. The employer should appreciate that, because now they're on notice. Now they can do everything that they need to do. They can start planning, So I just think even though the laws are different, they are in that same world. So we want to just help people understand where that world is.
That's right. And a lot of people don't know about it until they need it. But when they need it, it's here.
Right. And we just want people to use it. The worst is when someone says, oh, I wish I had known. I thought if only I had known, I would have made different choices.
Erin Choquette is our new CEO of Connecticut Paid Leave, and I can't imagine anyone else stepping into that role than you. And I think the whole team feels the same exact way.
Well, thank you.
Not many people can argue with you when it comes to FMLA or Connecticut Paid Leave. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Erin. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been another edition of the Paid Leave Podcast. Please like and subscribe so you'll be notified about new podcasts that become available. Connecticut Paid Leave is a public act with a personal purpose. I'm Nancy Barrow, and thanks for listening.